Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for this morning or the afternoon, depending on where we are. And we ask, Lord, that you can be with each person as we study, as we stretch our minds a little bit to understand the significance of this prophecy regarding July 18th and the evidences that connect it. We know, Lord, that our minds are weakened by thousands of years of sin, and even in our personal life, our personal sin and neglect. But we just ask, Lord, that your Holy Spirit can expand our minds and help us to understand, give us wisdom. And most of all, Lord, not just to understand it for ourselves, but to be able to share these things with others, that they can see them and they can see the significance. Be with us, lead us and guide us in this study through thy Holy Spirit. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. I've been a little bit troubled and it's hard to kind of explain, but one of the problems that I have is, we're dealing with mathematics, and we're dealing with calendars, and we're dealing with things that, most of us try to avoid most of our lives, even in school. Doing math is hard work. And the thing that troubles me a little bit is there's some things, some evidences that we have presented through the years, dealing in the area of chronology, that has come to this conclusion of July 18, 2020. And I realized that very few people actually appreciate or understand what it is we did. And the reason I know that is many people see these coincidences in numbers in their personal life, or maybe the Bible verses and things like this. And even our opponents think that we're deriving these dates through coincidence of numbers. And of course, that's not true. These dates were derived through the study of Bible prophecy. We look at the coincidences of numbers as evidences of the unlikeliness of something occurring. And, a good example of this would be if you take all of the dates or all of the years on the 2520 prophetic mirror. And I've done this study and I'm not going to do it right now, but you look at the fact that each of those years is followed or preceded by a 13th month. So the start of the year 742 BC, for instance, it occurs in a year where there's a 13th month, and then the beginning of that year in the spring follows a 13th month. And since a 13th month is added every second or third year, it's not that unlikely that you could have a year that starts right after a 13th month. But this occurs in all 8 dates on the prophetic mirror: in 742, 677, 723, 457, 538, 1798, 1844, and 1863. And so the fact that it occurs on 8 different dates makes it much more highly unlikely, about 1 in 2,000. But even more than that, the point at where you're going to add an extra month can span over a period of 30 days. But these all happen within about a day. And that creates a probability it's in the hundreds of billions to 1 odds. So it's something that's very unlikely. But I don't think that people really appreciate odds, because often things that are very likely, we can often think as what a coincidence, such as meeting somebody who has the same birthday as you. Or if you're in a group of people and you find that 2 people have the same birthday, and you think, well, what are the chances? Well, the chances are actually fairly likely depending on the largeness of the group of people. And of course, coincidences that are very unlikely to happen to you could be very likely to happen to somebody on the planet planet because you have way more opportunities for something to happen. So for instance, I know that statistically, to have a child born, let's say on your birthday, is 1 in 365. But if you're going to have 5 children, all that are born on your birthday as single births, it's very, very, very unlikely, but it has happened. And the chances that it could happen are extremely astronomical in some ways, but there's a lot of people on the planet, and a lot of people have children, and it has occurred. It wasn't necessarily that it would occur, but the chances that it occurred on Earth are not really that unlikely. So when we're dealing with probability and we're dealing with all of these calendars, I don't think that people can appreciate some of the things that we have found and how unlikely they are, especially in the context of Bible prophecy. And I've tried to make this clear in some ways, but I don't know if I can. I mean, I can't help people understand the difference between something that's likely and something that's so unlikely it's actually impossible to occur by chance. So I'm going to try to, but what I want to do is look at the 391 years, because that's the thing that's kind of been in my mind over the last couple of weeks in thinking about this, and especially as July 10th approaches. So we know July 10th is a date that was created by an examination of the 391 years in relationship to the Mayan calendar. At least that's where the idea came from. Doesn't necessarily address the Mayan calendar per se, but it addresses a period of 144,000 days. So I want to look at this again, and I know some people have seen it several times, but I know that it appears that when I present it, that it doesn't quite sink in the way that it does for me. Now my wife Heidi, she gets it because she's around me all the time. And so when I first showed it to her, she understood exactly how unlikely these things were. But let's take a look at it again. So we did a bit of this yesterday, but it's always good to review these things. And I just want to add some more details. So we have July 27th, 1449. Now this is a Gregorian date. Miller never used the Gregorian date in 1449. He just assumed July 27th. It would have been a Julian date if he had thought about it. But we're choosing July 27th Gregorian because this is the 26th day of the 4th month. And this would be on the Julian calendar, July 18th in 1449. Now, the Islamic date is 27/5/853, if I remember correctly, in the year of the Hijrah. So that's how they count their calendar. And this would have started their calendar started on July 18th at sunset in 622 AD. So this is 853 years after their calendar had begun. And what we have is these calendars have lined up here in this way. Now the Julian calendar continues to drift. But when we go over here to July 27th, 1840, you're going to see that the Julian calendar, this is the 26th day of the 4th month, the Julian calendar will have drifted 3 days more behind in this period of 391 years. And when you get to 1900, it's going to be again another another day behind, so it ended up being 4 days behind. But in this period of time, it's 3 days behind. And this date here on the Islamic calendar is 27/5/1256 AH. So one thing you'll see here is that the Gregorian, which is a solar calendar, and it's a solar calendar, but it adjusts every 4 years. So depending where you put a 391 and different things, you're going to find that, you know, this calendar is not always going to align the way that it does here. But in this case, where the leap years are, this fits in nicely, that this is 391 years. The Gregorian calendar hasn't changed its date. The biblical calendar has not changed its date. And the Islamic calendar has not changed its date. This happens only every 391 years. Now, I have explained, and I'm trying to explain this again, that this Islamic calendar, in this period of time, it's going to cover 403 years. And you can see this if you take 1256 and you subtract 853, you'll see that the difference is going to be 403. So there's 403 years that have passed on the Islamic calendar. So if you're Islamic, you're going to age a little bit quicker as far as your birthdays are concerned. But it's still the same number of days. And the reason that this is that they have a calendar that has 12 months, but each of their months on the actual Islamic calendar, their months are 29.53055. So that's repetend. Whether you put that above, I think you put this above. Days. That's how long a month is. On our calendar, so the Gregorian month, is 30.44. And it's actually a bit more precise than that, but that's close enough to see that our month is about a day longer than the lunar month. And of course, in a year, it's 11 days difference. That is, an Islamic calendar has 12 months in the year, and the Gregorian calendar has 12 months in a year. Now, the biblical calendar can have 12 or 13 months. That is, it can have an extra month added. So when the only time then that these three calendars align is every 391 years. Well, it would, if you double that, but that would be the shortest period of time in which you would have alignment between the three calendars. And of course, God has given us this alignment of calendars here to give affirmation to the prophecy of Josiah Litch. Because if he had used the Julian and then moved to the Gregorian and taken that into account, he would have come to a different date than August 11th, 1840. Now, if we just deal with the Islamic and the Gregorian, we would find that they will align just on their own, without the biblical calendar, every 391 months on the Gregorian is equal to 403 months on the Islamic. And this is it within a very close period of time. It's just a couple of hours difference. Or not a couple hours difference. It's depending on how you look at it. We'll deal with that. But it's very close. So if you're just dealing with months, they're going to line up on our calendar with the Islamic calendar every 391 and every 403. Now this is a cycle of, if we put it into our calendar, would be 32 years and 7 months. On theirs, it would be 33 years and 7 months. And that is there, you can see that there's 12 extra months, 391 plus 12 equals 403. So they go through an extra year every time we go 391 months, they've covered an extra year of months. Now, we've dealt with this before, that this period of time for both of them is the same period or number of days. That is, it's 11,900 days. Now, I've always said before, it's 11,900 days and 20 hours. But it's actually more precise than that. But, you know, often I just think of it as 11,900 days. Now, in this period of time, we're going to have 12 of these cycles. So some people have asked me, why am I dividing this by 12? Well, because it's divided by 12. It's not an arbitrary act on my part. There's actually 12 cycles between the Gregorian and the Islamic calendar that occurred in this period of time. And for each of these cycles, there was 391 months, 12 times, in order to reach to the end of this. Now we know from Revelation chapter 9, verse 15, that this is based on a month, a prophetic month of 30 days, a year, and we could put a day too. So now a day, we'll do a day, which is 1 year, a month, which is 30 years, and a year, which is 360. Now, of course, there's an hour as well, which is the 15 days after here. But the fact that you can take this prophetic day, month, and year and add them together and get this very precise period of time in which 3 different calendars will align is something that's really unlikely. Now, I don't want to, try to deal with the numbers of how unlikely, because there's different ways in which it can be calculated depending on the assumptions that you make. But it's something that has a great number of zeros, the unlikeliness of it. That this is a natural cycle that exists is evidence in the fact that these calendars are based on a lunar and a solar cycle. So it's alignment of the lunar and the solar cycle. That's what's happening here. But we're also introducing this alignment here with the biblical calendar. So it's something that makes it even less likely. So you'd have to take into account 3 calendars aligning in such a way. And then you would have to deal with the fact that this is based upon a day. Now, when I take this period of time, 11,900 days and 20 hours, and I multiply it by 12, so I add these 12 together, I get 142,810 days. So that's just 12 of these cycles, which is a cycle between the solar and the lunar calendar. And I'm just adding them together. So there's 12, or multiplying them by 12, whichever way you look at it. And so we notice this period of days. Now, if I was going to be more precise about this, because this says it's 20 hours, and we're going to deal with that, it's actually slightly less than 20 hours. It's 10 minutes less. And so this would make this slightly less. And so if I was going to be more precise, this 142,810 days is actually 142,809 days and 22 hours. And that's just simply the fact that I'm taking these 10 minutes and multiplying it by 12, and you can see that 10 minutes adds up to, if you multiply it by 12, it adds up to 2 hours, right? So because there would be 6 times 12, 6 times 2, so I think you can figure out that math there. So it just ends up being 2 hours shorter than this period of time. But this is the period of time that, you usually say that it is. If you go online, you're rarely going to find this calculation. You're going to usually find this one, this number for this period of 391 years. Because people tend to round up or down. Depends how precise you need to be in a calculation. Now, in understanding this preciseness here, that means if we're going to look at this period of time, now we say it's this precise because this is not quite 20 hours. So as I said, it's 19 hours and 50 minutes. Now, of course, that's still rounding it down because it's actually 14 seconds. Now, how I arrive at this period of time is by taking these number of months or number of years. Each one of these has 403. And so I'm just going to simply take 403 403 months or 403 years, but I'll take 403 months and multiply it by 12. And I'm going to get this number, and you could probably see that right away, 48, because that's multiplying this part, and this is 36 months. So that's how long this period is. If there's 403 months times 12, that's how many months it is. And those are lunar months. And those months, here I say the Islamic month is this long, but the month I'm going to use is the Hebrew month. It's actually a little bit more precise than this month. And it's 29.530,587 days long. So this is, a pretty precise measurement. Now, the Hebrews didn't use decimals. They used divisions of the day and so forth. But we know that we can measure this because of calculations that they did and the Babylonians that we have record of. And so we know that this is how precise they got. Now, some people just take off this 7 at the end because it's actually between 7 and 8, their count, sort of halfway between there. So you put probably 7.5 even. But anyway, there's different ways in which people understand this. But this is usually the calculation that they give for the length of the month. And so what I would do is I would multiply this number of months by this. And when I do that, I get 142,809 days and that 22 hours I was talking about. Right, so this number up here, that's the number that I get. Now what I'm going to do then is divide this number by 12. So I multiplied it by 12 to get the number of months to do this calculation. And I probably could have even just taken 403 months and divided it here. So you could do it either way. But I wanted to get the whole period of time. And so then we find we get this number again, this 11,900 days, 19 hours, and 50 minutes. Now, if we want to look at this period of time here, instead of in hours and minutes, and just look at it in minutes, we would obviously have to take 19 and multiply it by 24 to find out how many minutes this is. And when you do that, you end up with 11,000 and what's that?
You'd multiply it by 60?
60, that's right. I know I always do make that mistake. You multiply it by 60 because there's 19 hours. You multiply it by 60. And then you add these 50 minutes. And then what you get is 11,090 minutes. So that's the period of time. Now you can see that this minutes is proportional to this day as a number. But there is no natural relationship between the minutes in a day and the day itself. That is, we could say that maybe the hours in a day is something that's sort of natural, but that's a division that people have created to divide the day into hours. I mean, the Bible does it, and the Babylonians do it, and other people do it. But minutes themselves are, they're based not necessarily upon nature. We could say they're based upon the sky and the divisions of the sky. But again, that's man's division of the sky. God didn't divide the sky into 360 degrees. So this number here is in a sense what we would call arbitrary, but it's an arbitrariness that has been created, that exists, that we never chose it. It's been chosen by history. So this is quite interesting that if we take this cycle between the Islamic calendar and the Gregorian calendar, and we we break it down, we find that it's 11,900 days and 1,190 minutes. So a number that's 1/10 the number of this. So that in and of itself is extremely unlikely. Now, I'm trying to get people to understand, what it is we did and why. So I'm going to get rid of all these numbers and calculations here. Now, another way that we could look at it is we could look at it in terms of ratios, but I'm going to look at it another way right now. We had taken this period of time, and we had noticed that it was close to 144,000 days. And I'm going to move this marker over here because this is going to here. So if I looked at a period of 144,000 days, and I wanted to compare 144,000 days to 142,810 days, I would just simply subtract 142,810. Now, when I do this, the number that I get is 1,190 days difference. Now, we already saw that number in that 1,190 days. So I'm going to draw it here again, but I'm going to make it. So you got 11,900 days and 1,190 minutes. That's that period of time. So you can see if I subtract 144,000 days, or from 144,000 days, 142,810 days, I get this number again. But this is a number of days, not a number of minutes. And so this becomes an interesting puzzle that fits together. Now, if I take this period of 144,000 days and I would divide it like I did into periods, I would divide it by 12, we would know that 144,000 divided by 12 equals 12,000. So each of these proportions would be 12,000 days. Now, if I take 12,000 days and I subtract this period of time, 11,900 days, I would get 100 days. Now, 100 days is 144,000 minutes. But I know that the difference between this is not actually 100 days, because I have over here 1,190 minutes. That's how long this period of time is. So this is not really 100 days difference between them. It's 100 days minus this many minutes. 100 days is this many minutes. So I have to subtract 1,190 minutes to know the true difference between these two. And when I do that, I have 142,810 minutes. Now, what we have then is this relationship here between this and 144,000 days. And 144,000 days, of course, we know it's a symbol of 144,000, a pretty direct symbol. So that it means that this prophecy has something to do with the 144,000. But the likeliness of this occurring is so unlikely, you cannot describe it as anything other than design. Somebody would have designed this. This could not occur randomly, because it's interlocking all of these pieces of a puzzle together. It's not just about the coincidence of these calendars. which is an extremely unlikely event over this period of time. But it has to do with this preciseness of time, that once we, depending on how precise we measure it, increases the improbability. So if we just looked at a number of years that aligned without looking at days, we would have something that's very unlikely. But then when you start to put the calendars together, it becomes even more and more unlikely. But when you start to put it together right down to the minute, it becomes to an unlikeliness that is just too much to be coincidence. Now I hope people can appreciate it. I hope this helps a little bit. But there's more to this puzzle than just this. So we know this was one of the places where I saw that this cycle of 144,000 days, which is called a Baktun, starts the Mayan calendar, and we had 13 of them, which ended on December 21st, 2012. And that's the beginning of what we call the 13th Baktun, even though 13 have already passed. So we're in that period of time at the start of that period, right? So we have this Baktun happening here. Now, again, a lot of this is review, but I use this cycle of 142,810 days and 144,000 days in a precise way to arrive at two dates. And we dealt with them yesterday. The two dates were October 11th, 2019, and April 9th, 2021. Now, April 9th is March 27th, 2021 on the Julian calendar, right? So this is a Julian date. And the way that I had done this is I had taken this number, and some people sort of question it. Stephen has kind of questioned why I did it. I'm not really particularly sure, but I took this number and I divided it by 12, and I multiplied this by 5. And then I added this to the same number divided by 12, divided by 10, and multiplied by 5. And I added those together to get this number, 65,454 days. Now, what I was doing is I was using this symbol that comes from Josiah Litch's prophecy of the 15 days, which is a 0.5. But I wasn't taking this 0.5 in the way as an actually a half. I was just taking it as a symbol. And so what I was doing is I was taking one of these, or 5 of these, so there's 12, but I'm taking 5 of them. That is, I was taking 5 out of 12 of these sections. And I could have done this, differently, but you can see the 5 and the 12 there. But when I do that, I get this number, 0.41666, etc. So this number here is just this fraction represented as a decimal. And then I took 1/10 of that, of course, which would then be 0.04166. And so I took this period of time and I multiplied it by this, and then I added it to the multiple of that same number by this. That's really what I'm doing here. Now, when I did this, I counted these numbers of days as 65454 days to come to October 11th, 2019. And I did that on October 10th. And October 10th was a fulfillment of another prophecy about light to give a message to the Levites. So on October 10th, when I found this, I thought, well, I'm very close to this date that I just found. And then I decided to take this 144,000 days and make the same calculation. So really, I'm just taking 144,000 days, multiplying it by this, and multiplying it by this, and adding the two together. And when I do that, I get a period of 66,000 days. And this period brought me to April 9th, 2021. Now, I had these two dates. The date that I was looking for was July 18th, right? So I wanted to see if this could bring me to July 18th by using 0.5 in a different way. So I have July 18th here. But what I found is that the center of these two to July 10th, so not July 18th, so I end up being 10 days short. So here's July 18th. Is 273 days on either side. So I ended up being 8 days short. The center of that was 8 days short. And Dan presented that if we go to July 31st, we get this 813. From July 10th, it's 8 days to July 18th. And then it's 13 days to July 31st, which is July 18th Julian. And so this, he worked with this 813 yesterday, which is, of course, Daniel 813, which is where we get Palmani, and this is part of a Fibonacci sequence. But also we have this symbol here of 273, which is ending on March 27, 21 Julian, and of course there's more to this than this that I'm not going to show. But these 273s with July 10th in the middle, we know that this is the 10th day of the 7th month. And so I couldn't ignore this structure. Now somebody would argue, well, why did I take 5 and then take a 10th and add them together? Well, I think what was in my mind had to do with this 144,000, that this is a larger number, and somehow I needed to use this 10th. Now, so I don't think it wasn't really rational. Let's put it that way, that there wasn't really a reason other than I just did it. But the fact that when I did it, I produced this seemed to me to be highly unlikely. Now, another thing that happened is when I take these 144,000 days and I start them at July 27th, 1449, and I just need to see the time because I'm going to have to leave in a precise moment of time. It brings me to this date here. So this is going to come up here to October 30th, 1843. Right, so that's this date here. And I noticed that if I counted to July 18th, because I get numbers dyslexic, I actually get this number, 64545 days, which is a type of inversion of this number, which to me seemed very unlikely. Now, some people maybe don't like these things, but these types of inversions of numbers occur within ancient prophecy as well. So it's not something that it just did. I mean, I did it by accident, originally thinking I was doing this number, but I just wrote it wrong. But I found it was that number of days. And of course, we know that the number of days from July 27th to October 3rd, because it's the difference between these two numbers, is this 11,090 days. So that's what we have here. We have this period of time. Now, these numbers here, this is what Stephen pointed out to me. Now, I thought about it a little bit. Now, if we're going to take an inversion of this number, that is, if we're going to take 12, and instead of taking 5 of these sections, we're going to take 7 of them, you'll get a number that adds up to 99999, and this is the number. So if I take 7 12s, you're going to get this number, 58333. Now these two numbers, if you add them together, you're going to get 0.9999999, right? So they add up almost to 1. If you go on into infinity, they never quite reach adding up to 1. So these are inversions of each other. Now, we also have some other periods of time in here related to this. Now, I'm just going to erase all this bottom part. So we know that we have this year here. So we have, this is 1840, and this is 2020, right? So we got this July 18th, it's connected to here. But we have another date in between here, and this date is 1945. This is Hiroshima. And so I'm not going to do a whole study on all the coincidences between the dates here. And Stephen has worked it out to the day, and I have too. But I just want to show you something here, that if you look at this period of time, that this is, from here is 105 years, and this here is 75 years. And if I take 75, and I do this as a fraction of this whole period, this would be worth 5 if this whole period was 12. That is, if I divided this period by 12, this would be 7 and this would be 5. So a simple way of looking at it is that this is 180 years. And if I put 75 over 180, the fraction that I will get is 0.41666, right? And if I put 105 over 180, I will get this other number, 0.5833, right? So that means that this fraction that I chose here, the 5 out of the 12, is actually related to Hiroshima, the period of number of years from 1840 to 2020. This is in that same proportional ratio. Now, Stephen has worked it down to the day, so you can actually find to the day, you can get this precise ratio. Now, and I just don't want, because we don't have time to do that, I didn't want to do that, and so I won't. But I want to address another thing about this 15 days. So here we have this 15 days, and this 15 days relates to a half of a month. It's an hour. Now, of course, within an hour, we have 1,440 minutes. So this hour gives us this symbol of 144,000 as well. But also we can take this 105 years and we can see in it that symbol of a 15, right? So you just remove the 0 and you have a symbol of 15. And there was something else about the 15, which I can't think of right now. So this, well, it's the 10th day of the 5th month, right? So that would refer to the destruction of Jerusalem as a symbol as well, this 105 years. And so, you know, we're attaching all of these dates together. Now, I know I've presented this other times. Obviously, it doesn't hurt to present it again. But now, if I was to try to figure out the probability of this whole structure, I can guarantee you that we would be dealing with dozens of zeros to the power of 10. You know, so we would just have all these to the powers of 10s in trying to figure this out. What is the chances that this would occur? That we could have this kind of a structure, and that we could have Hiroshima, and that we could have July 10th, and that I could take this number and invert it and get July 18th. Now, there's still more to it, and I've been working on some of this in trying to deal with this symbol here, this period of days, which we haven't really dealt with in anything in our lines yet. But there is significance in this number as well, so it's going to show up. Now, we know this number here, 11/9, we could think of it as November 9th, but we can also think of it as 9/11. When you're dealing with Islam, and the fact that we had this number showing up again and again shows that this is attached to Islam as well. And so that's probably as far as I'm going to go here right now, because I'm not going to have time. But I do want questions in because I want to make sure that people understand this. And I want people to try to write this out and understand it on their own. Maybe, and I've thought sometimes maybe this is too difficult. Maybe people can't really see it. So you're going to have to help me here. Is anybody having any difficulty really understanding what we did? If you have, just tell me.
I'll speak for myself at this point, Theodore.
Okay.
It'll take a couple of times to go back over this to really lock it in.
Mm-hmm.
Being very clear on your presentation as to how you're coming out with these numbers.
Okay. So it's making sense.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And can you see how unlikely it is, or is that not as clear? Do I need to create a mathematical formula to say, that this is, 11.9 times 10 to the power of 1109 or something, and then that would, people would see, okay, well, that maybe is unlikely.
I think it's important that we label the calendars when we put the numbers up there. The water gets very deep.
Labeling, as the Islamic, the biblical, the Gregorian, the Julian, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Just to get your foot, check the temperature of this stuff.
Yeah. Now, somebody asked me a question, which regarding leap years. Do we take them into account in understanding prophecy? Like, is it just a matter of counting days? And one thing people don't realize is that the cycle that we have of 4 years is actually 1,461 days. That is, it's 365 times 4 plus 1. And sometimes, if you're dealing with a solar year, depending where you are in the leap year cycle, your dates can be off by a day as far as the calendar, but not as far as the sun. And I've had a hard time explaining that to people because people don't really understand calendars, Julian and Gregorian calendars. And probably even that just goes over people's heads talking about that. But when it comes to these dates, God set up these dates as symbols, but there is an actual physical reality of the relationship between the moon and the sun. And that's the thing that I think is remarkable with this 391 years. Because what God has done is he's taken a prophecy in Revelation 9, and he's given us this span of time that, in a sense, is based upon an arbitrary measure, days, months, and years. Now, well, days, months, and years aren't really arbitrary because that's part of nature. The hours part is. That's the human part. But the days, months, and years are something that we just count because of nature. But it's got this very precise measurement in relationship to this larger natural cycle. That's so precise. It's more precise than our calendar itself. And it's so precise that we can measure the moon and we can come within such a short period of time, 142,809 days and 22 hours in this period of time, which is really remarkable. That we can be that precise with something that appears to be arbitrary. And so that God has built this cycle into this prophecy has been noticed by other people who don't even necessarily understand the prophecy itself of when it starts and when it ends. They just know that this is 391 years, and 391 years is this natural cycle. But they haven't looked at this alignment of calendars. They haven't looked at what's happening here in relationship to the 144,000 days. And so, I'm still dumbfounded when it comes to this. I don't understand how this can exist. From a human point of view, I know that this is to me the strongest evidence, aside from the fact that we have these prophecies that point to July 18th. But as far as a secondary argument of trying to figure out how likely all of these things are, this to me is the piece de resistance. This is the thing that finishes it off for me, that shows me that this is so unlikely, that this is designed by God. Satan can have nothing to do with it. Satan has nothing to do with this. This is nature. This is God. But this is also divinity and humanity combined, because we have God's cycle and man's calendars. Now we have God's calendar there in there too, the biblical calendar, which helps us see that God is behind it, because he has this time prophecy that Adventism used to accept, but many Adventists still accept, and Ellen White accepted, regarding Islam. So, any other thoughts on this? Any other questions?
Numbers are built into the solar system, and we're dealing with a guy that's got billions of solar systems.
Yes, they're built in, but to look at it in, and we understand that. I mean, the universe is made up of numbers. Any mathematician or physicist would tell you this, that the universe is all numbers. But these numbers are numbers that are biblically significant, that they occur in this manner is God's fingerprint. It's something that you cannot, it would be like finding a watch, or maybe it would be like looking at our DNA, and we have on all of our DNA written in Hebrew, Yehovah, or something made by Jehovah. You know what I'm saying? It's like God is just signing this prophecy with his hand, saying, I created this. This is creation. This is not human devising, throwing numbers up in the air and seeing where they land. This is something that we have discovered, like discovering the law of gravity. It's not something created by man. And people don't appreciate that. I don't even think we appreciate it. And the reason why I don't think we appreciate it is because we'll see coincidences that, are going to happen. It's like, if almost every day I see the clock and it says 9/11, that doesn't mean anything. There's lots of times I look at the clock and it doesn't say 9/11. I only notice it when it says 9/11. Well, now I notice it when it says 18 after 7 and stuff like that. But, we're going to lots of times look at clocks and not see things. Coincidences do occur, but there's coincidences that are likely to occur. And there's coincidences that if they occurred, you would know that it wasn't chance. For instance, in 1973, I threw a penny in the hot springs well in Myatt Hot Springs in Jasper. And later on, me and my kids were there, and we found this 1973 penny, because this was in 1973 that I threw this 1973 penny. And the hot springs is gone, and I found this 1973 penny. Now, I'm just going to tell an imaginary story. That's a true story. But imagine if I had taken a penny and I had scratched my initials in it, and I threw it into the hot springs well. And I was walking in Australia, and I was telling somebody about this penny I threw in this hot springs well, a Canadian penny. And I looked down on the ground and I found this same penny just sitting there in Australia. Now, if that had happened, that would be so unlikely that nobody would believe you, and they would have to believe that maybe somebody planted it there. They put it there, and maybe people had been, what I would say is that probably people had been throwing 1973 pennies with my initials scratched on them in front of me for years, because I'm not very observant. And I just happened to see it while I was in Australia because I was thinking about pennies, and that's why I saw it. But probably there would have had to been millions of pennies thrown in front of me through the years before I ever noticed that penny. That, I know this is kind of a ridiculous example, but we'd have to think that that's designed, because it couldn't happen by chance. But that's the type of coincidence that we're talking about. Something that is so unlikely that you would have to say that didn't happen by chance. Somebody did that. So hopefully this is going to kind of settle it in your minds for all those people who are watching the video as well, because I've had some questions regarding this. But I think that we can then argue that me making that choice to take that 1/10 and add it, we know that 1/10 is still a symbol of the remnant, and we can see that this works in this structure, and all these things fit together in such a way that we would have to say that it's design. and that my intuition added the 1/10 of that to this is God's providence. And maybe we'll find another reason why I should have added that 10th, but all I can think is it's a remnant. So I added those two together, the 0.5, and we can see that they exist in this structure. So I'm going to have to go. So I can't really hang around.
Jesus is called the wisdom of God in 1 Corinthians 1:24.
Yeah. Okay. Just hang on. You can't go on because we're going to have to finish here. I actually have to leave because I have an eye appointment. But I just want to point out just before we close, Stephen says that 8 divided by 3 is 0.0615.
13. Yeah, 13.
Divided by 13. And I'm
Yeah. Yeah,
and if
you have it there.
multiply that number by 273, you get 168.
Perfectly. Every other number I've been doing at 252, it ends up something like 240.0052. This one, it just seems to be the exact same ratio. 813 is 168.273 is the same ratio.
Yes. Okay.
So to me, it's kind of interesting because 168, we know with Pinda and stuff.
Yeah.
There's just something with that 273 there.
Yeah, 273 is a very interesting number. So anyway, we're going to close with prayer because I'm going to have to go. But thanks a lot for everybody participating. If you have questions, you can always email me. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for this day and for this study and for Jesus Christ, who's the wonderful number. And we know, Lord, that you've given us this objective measure of reality that goes against our subjective measure of reality, that it affirms that you are leading us and guiding us. And we just ask for your continued care and protection as we go throughout this week. As we come to July 10th, we don't know what the date means as far as an event, if any, but we do know that it's a symbol of the Day of Atonement and that we need to take the time that we're living in very seriously. Please be with each person and help us to understand your truth. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So thanks, everyone. I got to go. And I appreciate your time. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at 7:30 again. Hopefully I won't have something so confusing as numbers.
By the way, the number of people in this meeting is significant. And I'll get into that in my class, maybe.
Okay. Okay, yeah, and I got to get a hold of you as far as when you're going to do a class. Okay, take care. God bless everyone.
Okay, thanks.
Take care.
Cheerio.
Bye.
Thank you.
God bless. Bye.
Bye.
Could you hand the host off to somebody so we could chat a bit?
I can, if you want me to do that. How do I do that again?
Don't ask this peasant. Somebody's smarter than I am. I know it can be done.
Yeah, I don't. I can leave meeting, and I can make Dwight in charge. Dwight's in charge.
No.